slideshow isn't working, so we're having technical issues. We should have prayed more for that. So I'm going to just look on the computer, but unfortunately y'all are not going to be able to see the pictures, but Adam is still working hard trying to get it going, so hopefully it'll start at some point and then we can backtrack on the pictures. But our theme verse for this trip is, "Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly beyond all that we ask or think, according to the power that works within us." And that is really what we saw on this trip, was God did far beyond what we even asked or could have imagined that he would have done. And personally, this was one of my favorite Mexico mission trips because I love them all, but I really saw the Lord hear our prayers and answer our prayers, and that was really, really, really encouraging to me. So because I knew the Lord was in it, I loved it so much. And so, the first thing I wanted to share about, which I have a picture of and y'all can't see it, but is the family that we stayed with. And a lot of you got to meet them because they came back with us this year, which was super, super exciting for us. We never thought they would actually come, but they did. And so their names were Dr. Orlando and Shadia, and then their 3 children. And we've stayed with them now for 3 years, which has been the biggest help for us while we're down there, because they cook our meals for us, which is a ginormous help to my mom, because when you're trying to feed 7 people that come from different households that are used to eating different things in a third world country, it is very hard to do that, and we have no time to prepare meals because we do not stop doing ministry. And so that was a big help to her, is that our food is ready for us, so we just come back and we eat and then we leave again. And so their family has been just a tremendous blessing for us, and that's why we're so grateful that they got to come back here with us and that we could try to be a blessing for them as they came to America and visited. And so the next picture, which you can't see, but is of a girl named Mimi. And you're going to hear us talk a lot about Mimi. She is actually a part of Pastor Amon's church, and I know a lot of you know who Pastor Amon is because he came with us, I think, 2 years ago and did some mission work here in America. And so Mimi is their evangelism coordinator at Pastor Amon's church. And we had no idea what a tremendous, tremendous blessing that she would be to us on this trip to Mexico, because she had already had all of our evangelism mapped out for us before we went. And she had it written down on a piece of paper for me and was showing me all the different evangelism events she had prepared. And she was very organized in everything that she did. And she was such a blessing to us because she loves the Lord so much, and she wanted to evangelize and evangelize and evangelize, and that's what we want to do. And so we were like, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's not stop, let's just keep going, because there's souls that need to be saved. And what's incredible is that in Mexico, so many people really do get saved. Like when we go out and we evangelize and we do it, like you have a lot of people who are coming to the Lord through that. I feel like here it's a little bit different from that. I feel like I go out and evangelize and evangelize and evangelize, and I rarely have someone come to the Lord through it. But there, it seems like it's constantly they're coming to the Lord through it. So that is super encouraging. And so Mimi is going to be talked about a lot throughout this because she was pretty much there all along the way. And we were already 7 people fitting into one car. And so we had to stop and get Mimi, though, to go with us everywhere. So then we were 8 people. But everybody's heard the term, packing them in like Mexicans, right? And that's what we were doing in Mexico, packing them in like Mexicans. So, and I can say that because the only Mexicans here are our family. So, okay, so the next slide is a really, really, really special slide, which is our prayer wall. And before Abigail comes and shares about our prayer wall, I want to tell about our prayer times leading up to going to Mexico. This was the first time that we had really done this, and I know that it made the biggest difference for our entire trip. We had always prayed before we went to Mexico, we always prayed for our trip. But this year, we specifically set a time aside every Sunday night, and we would pray together. Everyone who was going on the trip, we would call one another, and we would have them on 3 different phones. Everybody who was going, and we would pray, and we would take that time, and we would get the Bibles and the tracts and the kids' books that we had ordered, and we'd put them in the middle of our den, and we would lay our hands on the boxes with the Bibles and the tracts, and all of us would take turns on the phone just praying for our trip and praying over the Bibles that we handed out and just praying for the whole thing. And as it got closer, we started doing it twice a week, where we would call and we would pray over it. And I feel like that is what made the biggest difference in our entire trip, was that prayer that was put into it leading up to the trip. And so we saw that when we got there, because there were specific things that we prayed for, and we saw the Lord answer them. And so we were all super encouraged by that. So now I'm going to let Abigail come and tell about our prayer wall and how the prayer continued while we were in Mexico.
Like Chelsea said, we have been praying up to the point of us going to Mexico and even throughout our trip there. And the language barrier is so big and so hard to understand what they're saying. And I don't know a lot of Spanish, but I know that there's one thing that the Bible tells us to do in 1 Thessalonians, I think chapter 5, it says, to rejoice always, to pray without ceasing, in all things, give thanks, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. So, this is our prayer wall, and I just mentioned the idea to Chelsea, and I was like, okay, like, this is something that we could be doing while we're down there, and knowing that our prayers are making a difference, because like Chelsea said, we have seen the prayers being answered throughout our entire trip. And so, Jesus is in the middle, because if Jesus is not the foundation, there's nothing else that's going to flow from it. So Jesus was the root of all of it in our prayers, and God was just so faithful to answer them. And so the blue sticky notes are the prayer requests. And as you see, we have a lot of prayer requests from people that were just mentioning different things throughout our trip. We wrote them down and put them on the blue sticky notes. And then the pink ones are praise reports. So throughout the time, there's just so many details, like mentioned before, of how God worked in our trip. And so we wanted to remember and to write down, thanking God for what He did and how He answered our prayers. Because so many times we pray for different things, but we fall short of giving Him the glory for answering them. And then the green cards, the green sticky notes, are the names of God and how we've seen Him throughout that day and throughout our trip. So, like, for instance, if the Lord does provide, and there was an instance that He did provide, and we wrote Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. And there's so many different names, a loving God, a faithful God, King of Kings, because Jesus is the King of Kings. And so throughout this time, every night we would try to be faithful in prayer over these people, over the prayer requests, and we wanted to commit that to the Lord, because we know that the Lord works in prayer, and He just used that for His honor and for His glory. So thank y'all for y'all's prayers and for just being faithful in doing that.
Okay. So, was that the only slide that's working, or is the whole thing working?
Well, no, I just said that.
Okay, so it's still not working. Okay. So, one major thing that we prayed for before we went was that the Lord would show us who to help and how to help, and what He really, really wanted us to do while we were there, because He didn't want to just do things in our own efforts or it be in vain. So we really prayed that the Lord would show us who to help and how to help. And we prayed that so much, so hard. And so this is one of my favorite parts of the whole trip. But my dad is going to share about it and how the Lord showed us who to help and how to help.
So give the favorite part, the most kind of special part, the one that is the hardest to speak without getting emotional. I find out on the way over here that I'll be sharing this. So pray for me as we try to get through this. It was an amazing thing. We were out witnessing one day with Mimi that you heard about. And we got through and we said, well, is there anything else we can do? You know, we had an hour or so before we were to eat lunch. And I said, you know, we all agreed that we could try to do something else. And Mimi lit up like a Christmas tree. Yes. I want you to go see someone. And we said, okay. She began to explain that Pastor Luis had lost his leg. He was diabetic. And he had lost his leg and had a colostomy bag. And for 3 months, he's been laying in the bed. In addition to that, his church had abandoned him about a year or two before. Now, Pastor Luis was more than just a pastor. He was also a missionary for quite a while, and he loved the Lord. And I will just tell you, I don't want to read into more than this than there is, but that church that abandoned their pastor has been through 3 pastors. The church has split 3 times. You can take for what you want to take out of that, but I thought I'd mention it. So she told us this, and I said, okay. I'm thinking to myself, well, hey, let's go be a big blessing to him. You know, that's the evil, nasty thought that I had. It came across my mind. So we went over there, 8 of us in a 4-seater, went over to see him, and we go in, and we weren't planning on going in their house. Well, the wife, who, because of the financial strain, he was the provider of the family as a pastor and missionary, she runs a little store out of her house. You know, people tell her they want Coke or they want something. That's kind of how they support themselves. And that's very, very little, but it is something that they can do. Remember, he's been in the bed for 3 months. And so we really weren't going in, but she insisted, we want you to come in. So we go in this little small bedroom, and we begin to talk. And you can immediately feel the presence of God. And of course, you get convicted pretty quick, like you're going to go and lift him up. But he was lifting us up. All we can talk about was the Lord. Bible, scripture, prayer, things, and he was so upbeat. And here he is, no leg, 1 leg, excuse me, and his bag, and frankly, very poor. Well, as Chelsea had mentioned, we had really earnestly prayed for God to show us how to use some money. Because of this church and their support for us and their financial piece of giving to support us to go, it enables us to use some monies that we wanted, and then each one of us put in monies we wanted to do. But even far beyond that, there were some people in our church that gave some money and said, listen, we want you to use this however you feel. Well, that's a big responsibility when somebody asks you to do it. And I always tell them, I say, look, I'm going to come back and tell you exactly what, no, just let God lead you. But it was no doubt that God had orchestrated this, that Mimi had thought about this pastor in such need. So, of course, the first time we visited, we all knew, and we asked his wife and him to come in. And the question I asked him all 3 times that this happened, I said, Pastor Luis, when God tells you to do something, what are you supposed to do? And every time, of course, he said, well, you do what God tells you to do. And please understand, I'm not trying to bring light to our church for financial support or our family or any of them or anybody that's given anything. This is totally from God. And so we helped him financially. And if you would have seen the impact it had on both he and she. Well, I'm going to fast forward the second time that we went to, frankly, do some more for him. They were weeping bitterly. And he told us the story. his daughter, now, Pastor Luis is 57 years old, and his daughter is in, I think she's 34, 35, and she is diabetic as well. She had twins, and something in the pregnancy messed up her kidneys. And she's on, matter of fact, the day we went, she started dialysis. Amazing thing. The monies that they had for him to have the surgery, this colostomy, that they were going to try to reverse. And you got to understand the medical situation there is totally different than here. Unless you have a lot of money down there, you're going to a government hospital, and it's I've been in it. I used it one time a couple of years ago when I was sick. It's just not the same. And they told us about their daughter. And she is dying, frankly, with this situation that she has. He shared this because he wanted to give the honor and glory to the Lord. But the monies that they had for him, the little bit of money they had in our mind, it was big and bigger what they needed. He told his wife, said, we need to give this to our daughter to help her. Here he is laying in a bed, abandoned by a church. And his wife said, well, honey, we need this for you. And he says, don't worry about that. His daughter said, Daddy, I can't take this money. You've got to have this money. No, take this money. Somebody is going to come to our door and give this back. So they did. Yeah, that was a month before we came. That happened. So that is what faith is all about. Now he did say this. He said, I never thought it would be an American come to my door. But he knew that God would provide, that God would take care of him. And frankly, there's a lot of need for him financially. But this man, all he can think about is sharing the gospel of Christ. Am I supposed to tell the children's thing? No, you go ahead and tell them. But that was an amazing thing that we got to experience. Of how, frankly, we had prayed and God answered our prayers. Because all the time we can give money for people because so many of them don't have a leg. They have diabetes is just rampant there. And but to know that God led us to that through Mimi and stuff. And even asked Mimi one time, even before this, or maybe right after this, Mimi, how can we help you financially in what you do? Her husband works 12 and 14 hours a day, and how can we do something? And Mimi said, just help Pastor Luis. He's a godly man. You know, just to see her heart for that. So what a blessing.
So I saw the one picture that came up, and it was of Dad and Pastor Luis, and Dad's pants were pulled up to his knees, and so I was going to tell about that and why it was like that. So in Mexico, it's the rainy season right now. So it rains every single day, a literal flood every single day. And Wixla, the town that we're in, is at the bottom of a hill. So literally, the water is literally almost like up to your knees at some point in the road, literally. So when we went to Pastor Luis's house that day, it had rained really, really hard. And so he had come in like that to get through, to wade through the water to get to Pastor Luis's house. But one thing I wanted to tell about the water was before we came, they had some of the heaviest rains for 2 weeks before we showed up. And they knew we were coming, and so they had started praying Lord, please stop this heavy, heavy rain, because if they come and it rains like this, we won't be able to do anything. Because most of the people, almost all of the people that we work with, they don't have vehicles. They don't have modes of transportation to get around, so they walk to where they're going to go. And so when it's raining like this, they can't go. They can't evangelize in this rain because they don't have modes of transportation. And so they had prayed that it would not rain like this. And I am telling y'all, obviously you see in a couple of the pictures it did rain like that, but that was very few days that it did that while we were there, compared to it was doing it every single day before we came. And it only did it a few days during the 3 weeks that we were there. And so they were like telling us, like each person in the church would come up and tell me about how they had prayed that it wouldn't rain, that we could do more evangelism, and how God had answered their prayer. They said, do y'all notice that it's less rain? And we're like, yeah, we majorly notice that it's less rain, because every year it rains really hard. And so that was another answer to prayer. So I wanted to tell about the new mission church that was started. And actually, this church that was planted last year, and they've been meeting for a year now, is right down the road from Pastor Luis's house. Just by coincidence. And so the church, the new mission, we've been praying for it all year long. And these kids have been coming to the church, but their parents don't really come. And so they've been praying for their parents to come to church. Well, over the last couple of months, some of the parents have started to show up, and even some of them have gotten saved. And so these kids are so excited, and they knew their Bible verses, they knew the books of the Bible, they could turn in their Bibles to where the book was, and so they were so excited to show us everything that they had learned. And the pastor and his wife, he's not really a pastor, he's a taxi driver, and he lives about 20 to 30 minutes away in another town, but he's been coming and kind of fostering this new church plant and trying to help it grow, because they don't have an actual pastor who is there. So he is the pastor, and so he and his wife have been doing this. They come twice a week over here and meet with these kids, and it is so neat to see the fruit that has come from this little mission. And some of you might remember us talking about this church plant from last year. And so what was really neat was that when we were with Pastor Luis one time, my mom noticed how much he wanted to serve the Lord, how he really wanted to be able to go out and evangelize again and to preach the gospel, but he couldn't. He was just able to sit up in the last 2 months. He couldn't even sit up in his bed. And so my mom noticed how he wanted to serve the Lord still. So she said, well, maybe we can get the kids from the new mission church and they can come down here and sing a song for him. And she was like, well, we probably can't take them inside the house, but they could stand where his bed is, where he lays, that he has a window right there on the street. So we were like, they can stand right outside the window and sing a song to him. Well, ends up, we're in the church mission, and the man is preaching forever. We'd already told him we wanted to take the kids down to Pastor Luis's house and get them to sing a song. And he is preaching for literally an hour. And my dad and Brian are literally in the back going like this to the man, literally like this to the pastor. And I'm about to crawl under the bench, oh my word. They're telling this man to stop preaching. And it was getting dark outside, so we were afraid the kids weren't going to be able to go, but Pastor Luis was waiting on us, expecting us. So anyway, we ended up going, and I wish y'all could see the pictures of all the kids who, oh, okay, great. So this is all the kids in there with Pastor Luis, and so he got out of the bed and is in his wheelchair there, and they're all singing. Right now in this picture, he is actually sharing a Bible story with them, because that's what he wants to do, is to share the Word of God. And so he's sharing with them. And so it was such a special time. It was so sweet. And it's so sweet because they literally have nothing. But when these kids came, they had made coffee, and they had gotten these little bread pastries for them, and passed them out to all of the kids. And it's just so, so sweet how giving and kind they are. Sorry, I think I need to go faster because I don't know what time we're supposed to be finished, but I think our time's running out. And so then, skipping from that story, Pastor Luis, over back to Pastor Amon's church, They actually started a new mission. They call them a mission, we call them a church plant. And in the central part of the city. So Pastor Armand's church is literally in the very back of the city out in a field. And they wanted to start one that was more centrally located for people to come to, because specifically during the rainy season, people cannot make it out to the church because you literally cannot get there walking. So they wanted to start one that was closer. So they did this in Central. So we were able to go, and Brian and Abigail specifically helped to paint the walls of this new mission, and then they started meeting there. And that was so neat for us to be able to like be a part of them starting that and us getting to be there with them. And so what we would do is, one time with Mimi, we wanted to go and prayer walk around where the new mission was going to be. And so we did that. And Mimi, when we first started out, she thought it was so weird. I was actually in her group, and she thought it was so strange that we were walking and praying, and like we had our eyes open and we were praying. And she thought that like you're supposed to be like, close your eyes and be reverent to the Lord. You're not supposed to be walking and praying. And so we started out, and she thought, this is so strange. Like, what are we doing? And literally by the time we had walked to the city, she was crying, saying this is one of the neatest experiences that I have ever had. She said, like, you can feel the presence of the Lord as we're walking and praying. And she was like, I didn't even know you could do this. And she's like, but it's so neat, like how God is with us no matter what we're doing. And we were explaining to her like how important it is to like walk around, you know, the city and to pray over it, and that God always hears our prayers and stuff. And so that was really neat how that touched her. And so one other thing that Pastor Armand's church is, they constantly are going out and doing evangelism. Well, they go to the hospital, and the people are like waiting outside for their family members that are inside the hospital. And some of them literally sleep out there and are there for days waiting on their family members. And so we went and we evangelized one afternoon, and there was specifically one man who was there who said like he was not interested. He didn't want to hear anything about Jesus. He didn't want anything to do with it. And so we left him alone. Well, we went back one evening and took coffee and bread, and Pastor Armand, he like preached the gospel out to all the people sitting there waiting. And that was so powerful while he was preaching the word out there. And like, so this man who had been there a couple days earlier, he was still there. And Pastor Armand gave an invitation of anyone who wanted to receive Jesus to come forward. And he did. That same man who said he wanted nothing to do with it, that night he came forward and was crying and wanted to receive Jesus, along with about 4 or 5 other people who received Christ that night too. And so that was like a really impactful night as well, because that was another time that wasn't planned in evangelism. We had gotten done doing something else, and we were like, there's time, what else can we do? And so we went and did that. And then people got saved. So that was like super encouraging to me, that like, if you go out and you preach the gospel, like God is drawing them to himself. And so we just have to go, and God does the work. My mom is going to come up and share about a couple of salvation stories that happened during our time evangelizing.
Okay, the quick version of this now. We went out into a neighborhood one day. This is just a little clip of what could happen and what did happen. But they set us up in groups, and usually try to get some of us Americans with an interpreter. So Christian went out with Hal and I, Pastor Armand and his wife. The 5 of us went, and Pastor Armand took us to a home, and there was a lady there, and her mom came in, and we talked with her, and she had been diagnosed with cancer, and she said that she had gone into a depression after that, and she had had a lot of despair and anxiety, and was really, really low. And so Pastor Armand shared with her, and when we got there, Hal was, he looked at me and he just said, Carla, will you forgive me for the tone I had with you this morning? He said, I don't want any hindrances here. while we're sharing. And when you're out on mission, Satan comes after you even more. And so, you know, things can get a little, say things you don't really want to, but he can get in the middle of it. So Howard was just asking me to forgive him for his tongue that morning because he didn't want any hindrances there as the gospel was being shared. And we were praying. And you can't actually understand everything. How I picked up on some of the words through the years and know a little bit, but and Christian will try to, you know, tell us a little bit about what's going on, but we don't want to interrupt that process of sharing the gospel. So what we really try to do a lot in the evangelism is pray. And so here we are, and how to ask that to just clear any hindrances there, and we were just praying and praying for this lady's soul and her mom. Her mom was not a Christian either. And so we were just so grateful that the Lord let us be a part of that. And she came to salvation, and her mom did. They both prayed to receive Christ, and that lady was at every event that we had. Pastor Mom would have to go and pick her up because, like we said, they don't have vehicles or anything. And but after, I think, a few times of him picking her up, she still came. And they told us she wanted to go buy an outfit to be able to wear to church. And so that was just amazing. And then when we got back over after this visit, we went back to join up with some of the others who had been out evangelizing around that same area. And I really needed to go to the bathroom. And we were way away from anything that we know there, or town really. And so I was kind of embarrassed, but I was like, Pastor Mom, I really need a banjo. And so I asked him finally when I didn't think I could go any longer, and he said, sure, we'll find somewhere. So he took me to a relative, I believe it was a cousin of his, house, and so Christian and I went in, and we came out, and we talked to him there just a minute, and right as we were fixing to leave out, this young man came in, and he was the cousin's son, and Pastor Mon started sharing with him, and ended up, he received Christ there. And so, you never know, I mean, even something that I was so embarrassed to ask, I mean, salvation came. So you never know how God is going to put things in your path. You just ask him to direct your path, and even through that, salvation came that day. And also, in saying that, we had been kind of hesitant. We had been asked by Esther, and Chelsea mentioned her. We've worked with her several years with our kids' events. Very godly woman, and she still leads. But anyhow, she's been attacked by cancer this past year, and her family, but she is still serving the Lord. And she had wanted to go out and take cookies and drinks and all to the construction workers. And Hal and I felt kind of hesitant about that because there's major construction going on. They're building a railroad across the whole top of the city, and major construction every single day for us. But we put it off, but finally we went out with her to do this evangelism with them. And I don't think the slide is up now, but we have slides for all this. These construction workers actually, with the team I was with, actually ended up getting saved. And so, you know, something that we felt like wasn't, God ended up putting in our path, and we did, and salvation was brought to many of those workers, and I'm sure many seeds planted along the way. But, and at each of these events that we're talking about, I was able to take one of the Bibles and give to that lady who just got saved, and these construction workers. So we're constantly taking these Bibles to just give out to those who come to know the Lord. So thank y'all so much for all of your support.
Okay, we're kind of out of time, but there's one last story. I'm going to skip a lot of what we had planned to say, but there's one last story that I can't leave without sharing. I didn't get to tell about Pastor Nathaniel's church or Pastor Elvis's church, which I know those names are familiar to a lot of you because we've worked with them all of the years. But Pastor Nathaniel, one thing I want to say about him is we went up to his church. He has 500 kids who come every single Saturday to hear about Jesus. And so that is like, and we couldn't believe it when he first told us that. We're like, really, 500? Like, come on, Ryan, you're misinterpreting this number. Like, there's no way he has 500 kids at his church. Well, we went and we saw it for ourselves. And there are 500 kids at his church. So one thing he had asked us for, though, this has actually been a couple years ago, is that they have nowhere to baptize people. And so he had asked us for that. So that was something that we had prayed about for a couple of years and then ended up helping them build a baptistry. And this was something that he's talked to me about for like 2 years, is like, y'all got to come see the baptistry. Like, you've got to come see it. Like, and he's so excited. He's always telling me like the number of people who are getting baptized. And so finally, when we went this year, it's like an hour and a half drive for us up a mountain. So that's why we don't go to his church every time. But we went this year. And we got to see the baptism pool that they made. And his excitement over that is like just so encouraging and so neat. And the souls that are coming to Christ and being baptized there. So I wanted to mention that. But one last story, and I'm going to close with this. We did a lot of immigrant work this year as well that we hadn't talked about. But at the Pink House, we took Mr. Paul's cars and his spin tops to every kid event that we went to. We took the cars. But at the Pink House, the immigrants, I saw, and we have a picture of it, and I wish so bad that you could see it, but Pastor Nathaniel is holding Mr. Paul's car where it says that Jesus has come, he died, he was buried, he rose, and then he's coming back again. And the pastor was explaining it to two of the immigrant women there in the corner, and I just happened to see them doing it, and I'm like, oh my word, I've got to get a picture of this for Mr. Paul. And so that was like something so neat for me, that his cars are not just a toy for a kid, but like they are looking at the bottom of them, and they are telling what it means and explaining it. And like that, and that's a car that had not even, like my dad was actually, I have another picture where my dad is putting the cars together at this time, but the pastor had come over and picked up the bottom of it to take it as an evangelism tool to the ladies who were standing there not doing anything. And like, that's so cool. Okay, last story. I already said that, but this is the last story. Okay, so we're out at this immigrant holding place right by this immigration station. And Pastor Elvis and Pastor Nathaniel go every week on Monday to provide a meal for some of the immigrants. There are a couple of churches that come together, and the Baptist Association comes together and provides this meal for the immigrants every Monday. And so we went. And we were there, and we were passing out kids' coloring books that have the gospel in them, and all these little things to everybody. We had tons of tracts, and we were going down the lines, passing out tracts to everyone. And I met this evangelist lady who she was an evangelist from Venezuela, and she's traveling with them, and she told me these stories that were so neat of how God had been with them the whole way, and how she'd been preaching the gospel the whole way through their journey, through the jungle and through everything. And she said in their group, not one person died in the jungle. And like, that's unheard of. Everybody's group loses people in the jungle. And she said our group didn't lose one because like God was with them through it. And so that was really neat meeting her. But in the meantime, that I'm talking to this lady at one point, Pastor Amon and Mimi and my mom are talking with this group of guys. Well, when I got done talking with the lady, my dad and I kind of walked over to see what they were talking about and be in on that. And when we did, we saw the man who was sitting on the bench there. And he was laughing and scoffing and like I literally said to my dad, this is a shame, but I said to my dad, I said, they're wasting their time. I said, that man is not interested in the gospel. He's just laughing at them. Like, they should just move on to someone who's interested. That is what I said to my dad. Now, that's embarrassing, I know. But then, literally, within 5 minutes of them talking to him, the man is bawling like a baby. And like, literally bawling like a baby. And they're praying for him, and he gets saved, like, receives Jesus. When he looks up from the prayer, his face is completely different. Like before, you could tell, like he was so against it. He didn't want, like he was laughing. He was causing the other guys to like laugh too. He was getting them to be distracted. And then like he gets saved and he looks up and it looks like a totally different face. He is smiling, like he is so joyous, like totally different person when he gets done praying. And so I was like, Dad and I were like, oh my word, look at us. Like we said he wasn't interested, they were wasting their time, and then literally his life has changed. His eternity has changed forever because they sat there through the laughing and continued to preach the gospel to him. And so they received Christ, and we got them a Bible, and like that was one of the really neat stories for us because once again, we're wrong and God is right. Like every time we think something, it's like God always proves us wrong. Like my ways are higher than your ways. Like you don't know what I'm gonna do. And so it's just so neat, all the things that the Lord did. And we get to share everything, but probably it's what the Lord wanted us to share. But I just pray that it was an encouragement for you because this trip was such an encouragement for us. And if we think we did anything for these people, really they did far more for us. And I mean that, it's cliche for people to say that, but it's true. Like they impacted our lives so much, and we're continuing to pray for them and to lift them up because they need prayer. Because the enemy, he attacks them hard, and they need the continuous prayers and encouragement. Yes, that is Mimi, so you get to see a picture of her on the far end there. But I just want to thank y'all for all of your prayers and all of your encouragement and all of your support that you've constantly given over the past 4 years that we've been going to Mexico. And we can't thank you enough because we realize the power of prayer and we know what a difference it makes. And we also realize that you give to help this be possible. And we're really, really grateful for that too because there's such a need. So we just want to thank y'all.